All right, everybody, welcome to today's episode of We As. I am Gareth, your host for today. Excited to bring you another awesome guest episode. Before we jump into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in again, listening. We appreciate all the support that you're giving us. And if you can continue to do that, it goes a way long to support the show. Make sure that we can continue to get these amazing conversations out there in the world. And you can do that by sharing on your social media, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, and just, if you get something from today's show and it really impacts you, share it with your friends, your family, get it out there to more people, because it does truly make a difference and helps us continue to grow the conversation that is We As. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the show, and I want to have the pleasure of welcoming J.R Arce to the show today. J.R, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for being here. And, I really love that we connected via social media, via your platform. And you're going to get in and talk a little bit about that, kind of through your journey, and obviously your podcast and all the amazing things that you're doing. And we have a whole load of great content that we are going to touch on and talk about today. But a little bit of a kind of overview. I mean, we're going to get into this, but you have a really great story about kind of your upbringing and, going through, that kind of journey of your life to, going into the army and serving and, all the different parts of that kind of journey leading you to today, which I was fascinated by, and I've had pleasure of hearing some of that story. So I'm excited to hear a bit more. And I wanted to kind of, jump right into your upbringing. So, we spoke a little bit, and, I know a little bit of your story about that kind of where your kind of upbringing landed you to where you are now, and how that's been almost a transformation. So I'd love for you to start today by just sharing with the listeners a little bit about that, kind of little JR and what that was like.
Oh man, little JR back in the day. Thanks again for having me here. I do want to do a quick plug to the Bo and Luke show who connected us. If
Yeah.
it wasn't for that blog post that uh, put your put We As on there, and then I felt honored that Waza Media was on there too. So huge shout out to Bo and Luke for connecting us.
Yeah.
Going with the background, I am a first generation immigrant to the United States. Came here with my parents in the late 80s. My parents actually met and they had me, and I was born in the Middle East. And my parents' origin, they're from the Philippines, the islands of the Philippines. There's over 1,000 tiny islands and big islands out in the Philippines. And their reasoning for going to the Middle East was job opportunities. There wasn't many good jobs in the area, and they worked through the education. And my mother was a nurse, and my father was a machinist for an aluminum company in the Philippines. Well, from the Philippines to Kuwait. And they met and they had me, and then they had this foresight that things weren't going so well, so they decided to get out of Dodge. And then about a year later, the Gulf War
Yeah.
happened. This fight over oil came about, and they moved to America. We moved around a lot, trying to figure out a place to stay. We ended up settling in California, and so been in the United States for a while, and then I've been on and off from living in the United States. Actually, for work, I've been out of the country for 5 years. Had a tour with the Army in South Korea, and then 4 years in Germany. And so I got to do a lot of traveling, did a lot of exploring, a lot of adventures there. And that's one of the things I enjoyed about what the Army has done, being able to serve my country as a nurse. That was my first career leaving university. And then the Army just took me to lots of different places, learned about healthcare, how it works in different countries. And then as I switched from my career from being a nurse, being an ER nurse, so I did a lot of trauma, a lot of codes, accidents, anything of that sort. And I transitioned from that, and I moved my way from dealing with that to being a communicator. And so I did public relations for the Army, and did it in Europe. And I found that this is my calling. I did a lot of art stuff when I was in secondary school, in high school. Parents weren't too happy about it, but I still was able to add it as an extracurricular activity, kept it up while doing my science and math. and that's how I got my nursing scholarship to the military. But later on in life, I needed to find something that was more me. So I have some parts of my brain that are left brained, with the analytical side, and right brain, a little bit of creativity here and there. So that was my way of finding out who I was going through the army, and I'm grateful for that experience. And if it wasn't for the army, I would have not met my wife in South Korea, and wouldn't have gotten married in Europe, where we actually eloped in Copenhagen, Denmark. So and then we had our first child in Germany. And so it's just been a wonderful experience being in the army. So so for now, I'm not full-time in the army anymore. I'm now part-time, but in that sense, it's through the Army Reserve. So as the nation needs me, I'm still making sure that I'm ready to serve the United States in a time of need, in a public relations, in that type of role.
Yeah, it's quite the journey. I'm always quite proud of my like globe-trotting kind of journeys and adventures. And now we won't talk about mine because mine sounds crappy now compared to yours. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I find, it's such a eye-opening experience, and it's something where, if anyone ever asks me for advice, or within like many leadership roles that I've had, it's one of my big things I always say to people, like, just get out there and see different cultures. And depending on, you've got a very diverse kind of your background, and then living in other countries even when you were younger. So that was obviously the start of that. But a lot of people, like, I didn't have that. Like, I stayed in the same town pretty much. I grew up until I was till I was a teenager, 16, 17. So I never had that. And I started to experience that later into my 20s, and it really did change my life, just experiences and cultures and seeing what it is. And it really opens your eyes to, we're going to dig into a lot of content today, but the cultural differences, the diversity that is there sometimes, but the big divides that are also created in that. And I feel like it just puts us in such a better place as human beings when we have that, right? We see that we can be the outsider in an environment, and it teaches you so much about life and how you should approach, outsiders, so to speak, coming into your world. So I love that you've had that, that diversity. Now, that being said, obviously your parents came in the 80s into the United States, which, there was, to my understanding, my limited knowledge of history of the United States, but there was a lot of immigration. However, is that something that, and maybe maybe you don't, I don't know how much you talk about this with your parents, but did they have struggles with that coming in as, first time moving into a brand new country from obviously the Middle East, but, through the Philippines? Were the struggles in that for them, and did that reflect on you growing up?
A lot of the struggles actually started being in the Middle East. Even to today, there's been there several social media posts of kind of hatred towards or negative sentiment towards foreign workers that are in the Middle East. I remember, I think it was a year or two ago, of someone from the Middle East talking about why their house. It was a foreign worker. It was a Filipina who was had to be. They were holding passports, so they couldn't go home. And one person from the Middle East was talking about, why does my housekeeper have to get to go home? They should be working. I'm paraphrasing from what that happened, but that was in the last 2 years or so. So just thinking back from the 80s and how things were then, I remember my parents were telling me and how there was such a divide, because there were a lot of foreign workers, not only from the Philippines, but from other places as well. And so it was quite an adjustment for them, being in the Middle East. And then what I remembered growing up, when I was about 2 or 3, living in California, was that I only learned later that my parents decided not to teach me Filipino or Tagalog or any other Filipino dialect. My mom spoke a different dialect. She spoke Chavacano because she was from the southern part of the Philippines, the larger island. And my dad was from the northern part, Luzon, the larger island where the capital was. But they decided not to teach me the native tongue in an effort so that way I wouldn't have an accent and I would be able to assimilate English easier. going into primary and secondary school in America. To me, I felt that was, I wish I learned my native tongue.
Yeah.
Even though I would have had the accent, I think it would still benefit me. And I know that there's studies out there, and I'm trying to do it with my kids. I'm trying to have my kids learn French, and I'm learning along with them. Just they're at a young age, you're able to absorb information quickly, and we're able to teach. My kids can count. I have two kids. I've got a almost 4-year old, and I've got a 2.5-year old, and they're both terrible minions, but we love them. So my kids can now count to 10 in Spanish, in French, and in English. And it's just repetition. And we just practice it every day with everything they do, with their washing of hands and brushing their teeth. And I see it, and I'm trying to implement that with my kids, because I wish I had that when I was growing up. I wish I could had a chance to learn my native tongue, because I think it would help build a better connection with my Filipino culture.
Yeah.
Because to this day, I feel like I have some disconnects, because language does play a large part when it comes to culture, and I don't want my kids to miss out on that with their cultures.
Yeah, it's so important, and obviously I have never learned, other than probably about 7 words of Spanish that I remember from high school. I don't know any other language, but it's definitely so important that we're exposed to that. But do you think that? I mean, obviously the 80s was a long time ago. We grew up in a similar generation and time. Was it just because it was the thing to do? It's almost like your parents had to suppress their culture to be able to position themselves somewhere where, whatever choices they made to be where they wanted to be. And that, it seems like from the conversation we had previously and leading into today, that the follow through from that was it created suppression in you growing up as well, in not only the language barrier but also other things too.
I think it's a mix of suppression in order to fit in, because just like my parents had to do that going to the Philippines, from the Philippines to the Middle East, and then they had to do that again, coming to America, and fitting in seems to be a very common theme with Filipinos. They're everywhere around the world. In my travels, I've always found groups of Filipinos that I could go out and relate with. So that's been a fun thing as I've been globetrotting and traveling for work. So I'm able to find some way to connect with a community that's geographically, physically in that location. But then there's also another part when it comes to culture. When we talk about suppression, and um, I think the biggest thing, and I'll only speak from, I see it amongst other Asian cultures, but for Filipino culture, there is this culture of shame. And shame has a tendency to suppress feelings, emotions, and enacts different behaviors, from day-to-day interactions, to dealing with crises, to dealing with the hard things in life. Um, and it also affects the generation gap, between, uh, say, my generation and then my parents when it comes to certain conversations. I remember, that, as a former nurse, I have expertise in some parts of the medical field, where my father, who is not any way, shape, or form trained in his education related to medicine, we have differences. And even though I've been properly trained at university, and I performed nursing duties, and I have a license, he will not listen to me when it comes to the medical side of the house. Yet I have the formal education practice, but because he is the father, he is older, he has the authority. There's been multiple occasions where he will not listen to me, and then that brings on the part of shame, in which, as the younger son, I am telling my father what is proper, but my father would speak back against me as a way to defend himself against not knowing, rather than taking information as is, and say, I come from a, I feel like the nursing part previously came from a credible source.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not fake news. Not fake news. When it comes to nursing, I've been properly trained. I don't give medical advice anymore. Number one, because I can't, because I don't have an active nursing license, and so I don't. But when I did, in those conversations had with my father, I made sure that, this is what I saw, this is what I do, this is what I studied. Let me share that with you and it with your situation, and it just gives observations. So that was more of a defense mechanism when it comes to shame. And so being upfront, defending themselves, saying, nope, nope, you're not correct, even though you are properly trained and you are actively a nurse, I will still not listen to you.
It's like it's almost like an expectation that that generation, and I get that as well. It spans across many generations and conversations we have on the show, where it's kind of you should kind of be seen and not heard as children, and that kind of follows through a little bit into adulthood. And there's a lot of kind of bringing down the child's reality. Now, whether that's child's a child, toddling, or whether that child's, in their 30s or whatever, is just taking away your reality and your knowledge. And I feel like there's that big generation gap, right? And it crosses over many cultures, and it's so true. I even think about it in my world. So 20 plus years in the fitness industry, like you said, fully accredited in everything I do and deliver. However, I can never be right. My mom will say, "Oh, this and this is." I'm like, "Well, it could be this." Yeah, but I went to the family doctor, and the family doctor said that it's not this exercise. And I'm like, "All right, listen, trust me," right? But it's the same thing, so I get it. It's a really hard, and I get what you mean. It kind of creates that. It's their shame in not in because they feel like they should know. So there's that defense mechanism. So that really resonated with me, and I think it's also then it falls back on us, right? It's like that constant doubting: am I good enough? Do I really know what I'm talking about? All those things that kind of come from that. So, yeah, that's powerful, and I love the way you put it. That really sits well with me. Yeah. Um. So when it comes to that kind of culture, is that something that you said that you find these kind of these groups, other people from the Filipino culture, and you have those kind of communities within that? Is that something that's echoed a lot in those communities, or do you feel like that's quite specific to you and your experience?
Having lived in South Korea, I lived there for a year while I was stationed there, and I won't make too many broad generalities for cultures that I don't particularly identify with, but I will make observations. And personal observations is something that I will share. So personal observations, having lived in California in an area where there was grew up with quite a bit of Filipinos, but also mixed with other Southeast Asian communities, and having lived overseas, I can personally say that I have observed a lot of different uh, practices or examples of shame that are out there. A lot of it has to do with some of my peers who I went to school with, not only in secondary school but also in university, where when it comes to education, what are you going for? And especially in Filipino culture, the stereotypical career pathways are going into medicine, engineering. That's usually the two ones. And my sister is a nurse. I became a nurse. My mother was a nurse. My dad was a machinist. He did computer stuff. So those seem to be the typical ones. And I think the reason why was because my parents were trying to help us to get careers that were practical, put money, food on the table, a roof over your head. But they were also thinking about their situation. They got jobs based off what they could do during the 60s and 70s, that they could get out of the Philippines, make some decent money. And the dinar, because in the Middle East, when it comes to oil, it was higher than the dollar during that time. So being able to send money home that was valued higher than a dollar back to the Philippines was great for them. And so going back to my peers, and where if they would be taking deviating from the normal path. Whenever we have these family get-togethers with friends, or with parties or stuff, parents would want to brag about their children, what they're doing. And then there comes the black sheep who comes up in conversation and says, "Oh yeah, that one's pursuing an art degree, or trying to do music, or wants to start an own business," and then it doesn't end well. And so seeing those interactions happen, and as a young child, really sticks into you, in saying that, oh, this is probably an example. Maybe I should just listen to my parents and just, be the blind sheep and just follow what they say.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be ostracized by the small community that we had growing up. And then number two, didn't want to be ostracized by my parents. I did, before um, pursuing nursing, was my goal was to go into music. I was in band. I was in choral music. I sang bass when I was in secondary school, and I loved it. I loved the music, the arts community, and I wanted to be more into it. And my ultimate goal growing up was to be a music professor, to teach music theory, because I was such a nerd, and I loved music, and I loved composing. I think somewhere in this house, I've got old composers, some songs that I've written, chords and notes and stuff. Like, it was fascinating for me. Told my parents what my dream was. They said, "No, we're not paying for you to be a poor music instructor at a university." So the dream shut down. So I ended up finding another way to, and I ended up getting a nursing scholarship to the military, because I was in a medical program that was in secondary school, that exposed secondary school children to the medical field. So apparently I was, that helped me to get that scholarship, but also exposed me to different things, especially when it comes to healthcare in my area, in the Central Valley of California. Number one, access to healthcare, disparity of healthcare. But the third important one, which I think it helped me later on, was understanding the different cultures and the cultural implications to how healthcare is approached, the different mindsets that different people have when it comes to healthcare, the reasons why people just wait to the last minute to go see the doc, or the fear about taking pain medication. Some of those things are culturally related. And then later on as a nurse, I was able to see that in practice, why certain cultures wouldn't want to take pain medication, because it was a sign of weakness. And so those things have helped me with better understanding. And the biggest thing was, especially with my journeys around the world, helped me gain better perspective on life.
Yeah, and that kind of makes complete sense, and I guess you see it differently across different cultures, right? It's funny. I had a show that that will be out by the time this show is out. So I recorded a show with an amazing guy who's a music producer. Funny enough, you say that, which is what kind of tweaked it for me. And he was born and raised in Bangladesh, and a very, very similar thing where actually he was very fortunate that was supported by his family, who moved to Canada and kind of lived out that dream. However, he said the same thing, right? He said as a child growing up in Bangladesh, he's like, there is just things that you do, and everyone's expected to go down that path and do those things. And I love that we're able to, as our generation moving forward, that we're able to change that. We're able to really validate the reality of our children in many aspects, but especially in what they're passionate about. And let's be honest, it's a very different world. I mean, you can make money making YouTube videos now, so I mean, it's a very different world than it was in the 80s, but it's definitely something to be really aware of, and something I'm aware of as a parent, and it sounds like that you are as well. So I'm glad that that's happening and making a change. So when you obviously spoke about that relationship with your dad as an adult, and how that that your kind of reality, and that the kind of shame behind that, and you getting kind of shut down, is that something? I guess the first question is kind of, what, as a child, what was your relationship with your dad like? And did that stuff kind of mirror from childhood? Was there that same that same approach from a cultural standpoint for you as a child? Did you feel like your reality wasn't validated and that suppressed your voice, I guess, as a child?
I can say, and my sister will vouch for me, I was quite the rebel. Even though, as the eldest child, I was supposed to set the example, I still recall, and my sister will back me up, that there were many a times in which I rebelled against my parents. And I also remember the many times I was punished for rebelling and going against my parents. And so I believe there's several layers to this suppression. Number one was culture. Definitely grew up in a very conservative culture when it comes to family values, and those are the things my parents ingrained in me, was having very conservative beliefs when it comes to modesty, to being polite, and so that's one layer. Second layer, my dad was called into ministry. So he was a Southern Baptist minister, ordained around 1993, 1994. So his role as a minister was to plant churches within the rural areas of California that were language based in Filipino. So small communities all throughout. That was his calling. And so I had a second layer of suppression where I had to be the model pastor's kid whenever we went to different places, to be the example of how a good Christian, or what to be perceived as a good Christian, as a son of a pastor, should act. So that was the second layer of suppression that was put on me. So culture, and then also my father's profession, and then by association, I needed to fit into a role, into a mold everywhere that we went. And so I felt that upbringing kind of really set me for how I started out as an adult. And it wasn't until later on, into about maybe five, oh, how long has it been now? Dating myself now. Whew, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, I finally felt that I had the strength to break through the chains of suppression that were holding me down, and I was able to finally voice myself against, and to speak my voice to my father about how I truly felt, and then how I truly wanted to live my life, because it was my life.
Super powerful, and everyone, if you take nothing else from it, take that you live the life you want to live the way you want to live it. It's so powerful. But so many of us experience that, right? Through many different avenues. Something that This is something that comes up on a lot of shows when I have conversations, specifically with men, because we're going to talk about men and relationships with their dads. So obviously there was those outside influences on your dad and his world, so to speak. And obviously that impacted you, and it was like you said, right? Kind of be quiet and show up as I'm meant to show up, as the role model child, etc. How, away from the spotlight, I guess, so to speak, how was your relationship with your dad from a dad to son standpoint? So was your dad great at showing kind of emotion? Was he great at showing love? Was that something, or is that just something generally in kind of your culture that you see a lot of with men and their sons, or is that something that's, you would say, is missing, or was for you?
Oh, this is taking me back. I just had kind of like I remember when we used to go out into the theme parks. It's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like that rush roller coaster, or you're about to just go down. That's just what I had right now,
Yeah.
just in my mind. I'm like, whoa, let me bring that back. So the first thing that came up to mind is, I'm trying to remember how many times I remember my dad said the words, "I love you." And the fact that I'm having to think about it is is kind of telling for how, what the verbal confirmation of his love towards me is. The thing that sticks out to me in memory the most is his actions, the things that he did for myself and for my sister growing up. Um, I had and I found out, I only found this out later in life, that how I grew up with my father rather than with my mother being at home was different. It was not the apparently the American cultural norm. My mother was the breadwinner when we came to America. My dad had difficulty trying to find a job. The store, I'm told that he was overqualified with all the things that he had, all the certifications and all the leadership and program management positions he had in the Middle East. They didn't properly transition over into a position that he could easily take when we came to America. So my parents came to a decision point where, we needed to put food on the table and a roof on our head. It didn't make sense for both parents to work in order to pay for one for daycare to pay for. So it was a financial cost, financial savings in order to have one parent at home. So my mother, who worked in the newborn nursery, and then she went into different things related to nursing, and she branched off with her career, very successful career, and she loved it. Became the breadwinner for our family, and so my father was the one that I grew up with the most at home. He handled the household, managed the bills, cooking, cleaning, repairing. He picked me up from school. He dropped me off. And it was an interesting perspective, and I only realized it later in life when all of my peers were saying, your dad's coming to pick you up, your mom's not picking you up, because all my peers their moms would pick them up because the mom stayed at home. And so it was I didn't realize until later, but I do remember the times I forgot things at home, and they're very important things that I needed for school. But without complaint, I remember that he would drive, and I would tell him where I left it at home because I was a very forgetful kid, and he would bring it to school for me. And I remember I forgot a lot of things. So, and then the times in which I had the hand-me-down, I had the hand-me-down minivan. It was a Mazda MPV, 1992 hand-me-down that had over 200,000 miles on it, but built like a tank. It was, and the cool part was when I was at university, I was the designated driver, so I didn't drink at the time. And so if people needed rides, I had I was able to seat 7 or 8 people in the back. So I drove that thing around. Whenever I had issues with that vehicle, my dad would come and pick me up, teach me how to fix it up, and then I was off on my merry way. So my dad was always there to bail me out. I forgot a lot of things, and he still bailed me out. And so the relationship, what I learned with my dad was that I don't remember him complaining about all the times I called him for the issues that were my fault.
Yeah.
I don't recall him complaining at all. And so that's the one thing I hope to carry with my kids when they grow up, that as we're human, we all make mistakes, and to see the love through my father by going out and helping me in person, no matter how many times and how easily preventable the mistake I did, he was always there for me.
Yeah, I love that. I actually recorded a show last week, and we spoke about this, which is why it was kind of fresh on my mind. And it sounds like you've made a realization as an adult, much like I have, that love and support and our dads being our role models comes in many different forms. And I think that we as parents now are probably a lot more in tune with the emotional support. I think about how much my daughter gets smothered in hugs and kisses and gets told that I love her, and I have a daughter, maybe that possibly back then would have been a bit different, but for many people I've spoke to, is dads weren't, it was kind of the shame thing, like you mentioned, right? That they weren't going to show that love and that affection, or be the silly parent, or the parent messing around in front of people, like you said, in those social situations, and other situations where there was pressure to be that role model. But the support came in different ways, and it sounds like your dad was the greatest role model for so many things for you as a parent, and what I've come to realize also later in my life, is that my dad did the same thing. Like I speak a lot about work ethic. It's one thing it's a core value of mine, something I'm so passionate about, and I got it from him. Did I get hugs and kisses all the time? And did I get told that, I was loved all the time? No. But I got those things. And when you were talking, it made me think of the times where we lived as kids. We moved a little bit around kind of the towns where, I grew up. We lived probably 20 minutes away from where I went to school, and everyone else lived in that town. So I would spend many evenings out, as a teenager with people that, I was kind of hanging around with at school. And my dad would drive at midnight, pick me up, take me home. He would come and collect me if I couldn't get home. There wasn't, it wasn't easy to get a train or a bus in a smaller town. And all those things, right? It's like you said, it's those acts, it's those supports. And, I'm glad that I've come to appreciate that now in my life, because I've maybe didn't see certain things as a role model to me, but he's my role model in many ways. And it sounds like that's the same for you.
The other part that now that I'm married with kids, the one thing I do remember the most is how my father treated my mother. And I guess the best way I can describe it is my father treated my mother like a queen. My mom didn't drive a lot. She drove when she needed to, but my dad was the one that dropped her off at work, picked her up from work. When we only had one car, it was pretty funny where my sister and we would actually load ourselves in the car, sleep in the car while my dad would drop my mom to work, because she worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital. So 7 a.m. before 7 o'clock she needed to be there, and then 7:30 was the end of her shift. About 3 to 4 days a week. Nurses, medical providers, they do hard work. They work long hours, so much appreciation to them. But even when we eventually had 2 cars later in life, my father would still drive her, so my mom didn't have to worry about the stress of driving. And then also he did a lot of the cooking and cleaning, and it almost was like hand and foot. I remember that's the way I described it. My father would make sure after a long day of work that my mom was taken care of, because she's the breadwinner, and she aches and pains for being on her feet, dealing with patients. That those memories are still fresh in my mind, and how well my father took care of my mother. And those are things that I try to do with my wife, who is a labor and delivery nurse. And especially when the whole world changed around the same time last year.
Yeah.
The stress level of my wife being at work it dramatically increased. We didn't know any day where something might change, where at home one of us may have to be hospitalized because dealing with patients on the front lines, and that was my wife. So I wanted to make sure that I took the example from my father to make sure I supported my wife in what she was doing as she was in the hospital taking care of patients on the front lines when this all first went down, where it's a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of fear.
Yeah.
I felt like I needed to do my part to just reassure my wife, I got you. I'll do what I can. I've got the kids. You're doing what you need to do. Let me try to do my best to take care of you.
Yeah, such an important message. And I love that you've been able to find so many things from, as you said, there was that process of going through and finding your voice and everything that comes with that, but being able to find the amazing things in there that are just going to make, you and I and everyone listening and everyone else around the world, when they figure those things out, makes us better human beings. And, that's so important that our children see how we treat our partners. And not that it doesn't go the other way, but we're talking man to man now, the way we treat the woman that we decide to marry, and how that that shows, because I'm showing my daughter what she should expect, right? She should expect I should be setting the bar super high, so when she makes a choice, and maybe she chooses she falls in love with a man, maybe she falls in love with a woman, who knows. However, whoever she chooses to fall in love with, this is the way you should be treated. And that's something that I honor you for in bringing up and doing, because it's something that's so important to me. And we just hear so many sad stories where that's not the case, and that there's not that role model there. So yeah, and big respect to your wife as well, out there, doing what many wouldn't choose to do ever. So yeah, big respect. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, because I want to find out a little bit more about you touched on a little bit on how you kind of turned that corner 8-9 years ago, and you started to find your voice, and you spoke to your dad about living the life that you wanted to live. Now, obviously, you were talking in context to relationship with your dad, but what does JR finding his voice look like across your all spans, all walks of your life, and everything that you do? What does that look like for someone that, like, I kind of understand what it means. However, for many people listening and me, is paint us a picture of what that looks like.
Finding my voice came through a realization that I was living during the time, this was around 2012, 2013. It came into the realization that the life I was living was not my own. The decisions that led me up to this were not really made by me. And so that's when I felt trapped, and I felt that I needed to get out. And the other trigger that came out about it was the death of my mother, who died from breast cancer in 2013. And so it's kind of disheartening to that became a trigger point, along with a lot of different things. But definitely my mother's death played a big role into deciding that I needed to break away these chains of suppression, and I needed to live a life that I would like to wake up every day, be happy to go tackle the problems, and be happy about the problems that I'm facing, because life without problems would be boring.
Wouldn't it?
It would be so boring. So to find a life where be happy to have certain problems that I want to be happy to solve every day, to wake up energized and passionate to tackle these things, and to be creative in the matter that I want to. That came at a trigger point around 2013-14 timeframe. And then it manifested more in 2015 when I decided to make that switch from being at the bedside as a nurse, and then switching over to a role in communications and public relations. And so it was really 2 years after my mother's death that I found an opportunity, and I said, "This is it. This is what I want to do." And I really have the Army for giving me an opportunity to serve in a public relations role, as a storyteller slash communicator slash photographer slash videographer. It was an all-in-one type of package that they needed someone to help tell the medical story of what we were doing, and be as a nurse, but also having a side hustle, having ran social media stuff on personal side, but also a headshot photographer trained by Peter Hurley out of New York City, world's well-renowned headshot photographer. Trained by him. That helped with the role that I have as an Army communicator, to tell the story of what we're doing medical wise, and how we're working with other nations in Europe under NATO. We're sharing medical practices. We're working together. We're teaching. We're doing exercises. So in case something happens, we know how to work together. Great stories. I was able to tell it visually, through words, through video, and that was where I found out this is what I want to do. I want to wake up, solve problems related to communications. I want to tell the story of the organization that I work with, and I felt alive. Not to say I didn't feel alive saving the lives of other people, but I felt a new calling to serve the Army, to serve my country, and I wanted it. I wanted it so bad, because the path of being a nurse and being in the military was actually a two-part dream for my parents. My father, his dream was being in the Navy. He could not pursue his dream. And so I felt like I was carrying on his dream by serving in the United States Army. The nursing part, serving as an Army Nurse Corps officer, came from my mother's side, where she did nursing related to babies, and she did diabetes education. She did clinic nursing. She did a lot of different things. But being a nurse was coming from my mother's side. So I was really living the dreams of both my parents. And then when my mom died, and then 2 years later, an opportunity popped up, I decided to take it.
Yeah.
And no regrets.
Well, it just for, some people will be watching this, but others mostly will be listening. I had the pleasure of seeing the change in your facial expression and your energy just talking about it, which kind of says it all. And I love that. And it's interesting. I've been having a conversation recently about careers, and we spoke about this off air, and how things in the world are changing right now, and everyone's kind of adapting. And I had this conversation with my wife actually just today about new things and opportunities in the future. And I just said, what do you think? Like, where do you see me? What do you think that I should be doing? Because it's great to get insight from the person that knows you most in the world. And she shared a little bit of what she said. She said something that you never seem more alive than when you're doing XYZ. It's a long-winded conversation, but it seems like you've definitely found that, and you come alive, and you've got a really warm personality anyway, but it just really comes to life and comes to the surface when you talk about that. And it's so great that, well, two things, it's so great that you found that, but also I think it's a good message that and you already touched on the kind of problems in life, but sometimes tragedy brings a level of joy. And it's not to take away from losing a parent and the heartache of that, and I'm very fortunate that I haven't. But you found that, and maybe it was that tragedy that opens us up sometimes to the world and what's out there, and it sounds like that really happened for you. So yeah, that's powerful. And I really love what you said about problems as well, and I'd love to dig into that a bit more, because that's something that I'm listening to an audiobook right now, and so two things. And the big one is how we talk about problems and how people see this process of life as if I solve all these problems and I get through these problems, at the end of it there's going to be this like enlightening, joyful, and the book talks to, it's actually a book called The Untethered Soul, and basically what he says in the book is that once you get through all those things you need to solve, guess what, there's going to be more things you need to solve. So what you need to do is you need to change your mindset and your attitude towards that. And I really love that, and it sounded like you're talking very much along the same lines, because you can choose whether they're a positive or a negative in your life, right? It's so powerful. I love that.
As you mentioned that book, I'll name drop a book where I got that.
Yeah.
That from, because it was an original idea from me. It was from Mark Manson's How Not to Give a F.
Oh yeah.
And it's a great book. It's a great book about perspective. So that was an eye opener for me. But that also brought up that part about problems, and life is a series of problems, and the fun part is solving them. And I truly believe that for myself.
Yeah, and I think that's I had this conversation a while ago with a very close friend of mine. He's actually the co-host of the show, and we spoke about this when we were, I don't know what we were doing, but we were having a deep conversation, and it was the same thing. And it was almost like we and this might cross over to women, but I'm not one, so I can't speak to it. But as men, I think when we don't have them in our lives, we don't have things to solve, we go looking for them. We go looking for problems to solve, and that can sometimes lead us down the incorrect path, maybe as we've all experienced in life, and maybe definitely as it sounds like as a kid and a teenager for you. We look for them. We look for things to solve, and we look for those. And then what happens is, I think if we're not having those internal conversations about those problems, and we're maybe avoiding that stuff because we see them as negative, we're going elsewhere and we're trying to fix everyone else's problems, and we all know how that goes.
I think that would explain all the side projects that I have, but I haven't finished yet.
Yeah, right. I must do that. And then, yeah, it's true though, right? We spend our time, we look around the house and we find things. My wife was like, what are you doing now? And I'm like, well, this just needs, yeah. And it really doesn't, right? And I think it's just a process. I think it's us as humans, but definitely as men, as, maybe having that that ingrained generational thing where we have to be busy and we have to fix the things and do all the things and that sort of stuff. And it's probably get way into some other deep stuff with that, but I think that's definitely a real eye opener, and I think that's so impactful that you're able to go through that, but you're able just to approach life. And shout out to Mark Manson, because that is a great book that I also really enjoyed reading. I actually think I listened to it, but yeah, same.
One thing to add, just because we brought up relationships with our wives, is that I have to be mindful when my wife is talking to me that I need to either ask the question, do you want me to listen to you, or do you want me to solve your problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the things I got to think about, because sometimes my wife just wants to vent. And then sometimes my wife is looking for a solution to a problem, because and I'm guilty of this. I was very, very quick to jump to solving my wife's problem for something. And so I need to make sure that, depending on the context, I'm getting better at it as I'm learning to know my wife every day, and I love her for that, is trying to figure out, without asking her, do you want me to solve your problem, or do you want me to listen to you?
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that, because is that I don't know if that's also in Mark Manson's book, but because that's something we actually, funny enough, had about 3 months ago, had that conversation in our house too. The same thing. I was like, we should like lay out there, because I'm a big philosophizer, and my wife's always like, oh, she's like, what are you doing now? I was like, I was downstairs having a conversation with such and such, and she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, oh, philosophizing over stuff. And that's what I always get. Like, she just stops talking to me and starts ignoring me. She's like, because you're just like in your own world. And that's exactly what I do. So I'm the same. I'm just like, I can sit here and listen. I'm just like, I can find out 50 ways to solve your problem, but I can also just be quiet. And I love that we're so aligned on that, and we're taking that approach in our relationships, because it is truly, I think about it from a child-parent relationship too, right? Like if we're constantly solving our kids' problems, they're not learning anything, right? We need them to solve their problems, and we just need to subtly edge them in the right direction sometimes. So
because by encouraging them, those neurons will start making connections and realize cause and effect. If I do this, this will happen. And but if someone does it for me, those connections are never made.
Yeah, we're bigger than my wife's always like that. Oh, you're always giving her a hard time, making her like clean the bathroom mirror because there's toothpaste up it. I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're going to stop doing it when you have to clean it every time, right? So true. But it's so easy. The easy way out is to fix everyone's problem, and I think that's the greater message as dads, right? As men, the easy way is to often just solve the problem, just to fix the problem, is to tidy the pair of shoes up, to wipe the mirror down, and do whatever it is. And we have to know that whether it's our partners or our kids, is that they have to go through that journey themselves, and we can't always take the brunt. And I think for our mental health, it's important that we don't. Right, because it can be a big burden if you decide to take that stuff on, whether you're expected to or not. So I think that's a really, really important message. I would love to. It'd be so great just to philosophize over those things, and I love that we're so aligned on those things. But I'd love to, before we kind of start wrapping up, I'd also love to talk a little bit. Obviously, you spoke about going through into public relations and all the great things you're doing, but I'd also love for you to talk a little bit about what you're doing with the kind of digital marketing space and your podcast, and kind of tell the listeners what it's all about, because we're going to be collaborating on some stuff, and I'd love to hear a bit more, and I think everyone else would too. And it's a good plug for you, so go ahead.
I appreciate the opportunity. I am the CEO of Waza Media. That's WAZA Media. My business partner and I, we've been working together for about a year or so. My business partner has owned the company since 2013. So we're out in the Washington, D.C. area, serving the Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. But we've taken clients who've lived in the United States and other places as well. But at Waza Media, with this digital marketing agency, we truly believe in the power of storytelling. Your story is the best way to communicate to another person, to another organization, to a group, to a community. Storytelling goes way far back into how humans first connected to each other, either through oral storytelling, to pictures on rocks out in caves. Those tell stories, and so we, with the power of storytelling, we truly believe that's how we can help get your message out. And so we support clients when it comes to communications planning, helping them, doing a lot of consulting, different ways and how to push your message out. All the tactics are out there. There's social media, there's the media. We recently did this is a plug for a recent episode that we did with a journal, a news producer out in the Charlottesville area, and she talked about the best ways and how to leverage the media to tell your story. So it was a great episode. But there's definitely tons of tactics out there, and we would be happy to help you with your story and getting it out there. Moving to the podcast, we're coming up on 22 episodes, so it's we've got a rhythm now, and I think we're ready to keep continuing on with it. We did a change at the beginning of this year where we're actually reaching out to people in different industries about how they're telling their story, using any type of medium, if it's social, if it's building their community. The last couple of episodes where I interviewed a childhood friend of mine who got into the artist community. The last couple episodes, we dealt with the science community. And then it's just been a great adventure learning, and it's just probably why you get a kick out of it. It's just hearing these stories and being able to relate with people. And the biggest thing for me is getting more perspective.
Yeah, that couldn't align with me anymore with what you just said. Building the perspective, widening that lens. We kind of spoke about it from a cultural travel standpoint, but it's such the same. I speak to people all over the world from different cultures, from different upbringings. And I will say to anyone, thinking about exploring whatever medium of communication it is, get out there and expose yourself to as much as possible, because whether it's through a podcast, whether it's just through conversations, whether it's from exploring your local area, and the diversity that you have makes a massive difference in the world to everybody. So I think that's so important, and I love that. And the good news is, I saw a stat a few years ago that said the average podcast has 7 episodes, so you are killing it above the average. So there you go. It lasts the average of 7 episodes, so good news.
Here's another statistic. 26% of podcasts that are on iTunes only have 1 episode.
Only have 1. Wow, there you go. So 7's
7. Wow.
Yeah, and there's something like friggin' 1.8 million podcasts or something crazy like that. So we are very grateful that you're listening to this one, and you're also going to head over and listen to JR's as well, with his business partner. And I'm going to put all that in the show notes as well, so you'll be able to find all the contact points. And we're going to continue to collaborate in the future, which I'm excited about, and just to kind of see where the conversation continues to grow. So yes, as I said, everything will be in the show notes. Please, please go check out what these guys are up to and see what's out there in those amazing conversations, and see what you can learn. Before I wrap up, JR, do you have any last points, any last tips, anything else you want to share before we wrap it up?
This has been a great time, and I'm thankful for this opportunity. If you're looking for me on social media, you can find me at J.E.K.U. ARCE. I am all over pretty much all the platforms except for TikTok. I haven't really dove into TikTok. I need to. And then for Waza Media, you can find myself and then my business partner Andrew Milner. You can find us at Waza Media. That's WAZA.media for our website, and we are Waza Media and pretty much all the channels.
Awesome. Well, there, go check them out. I just want to, again, thank you for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing a little bit of your story and everything that you're up to. And, I appreciate those, these organic collaborations that come around are, the universe's way, or however you see it, their way of bringing people together and conversations together. So again, massive thanks. Thank you everyone for listening and tuning in. If you learned something amazing today, if you picked up some great information, if you heard about a book that you might go and read, whatever it is, share the episode, get it out there in the world, because it really does truly make an impact. On that note, remember everyone, be the best possible version of yourself you can be. Keep making a difference in the world, and we will catch you on the next episode.